Good morning, Year 9. I hope you're well and had a lovely half-term break. Hopefully you had a chance to get outside, enjoy the lovely weather, and not think about work for a little while. So we're going to be continuing on with Much Ado About Nothing. So please could you write the date and the title, Much Ado About Nothing. So if you do now, what can you remember about the play you watched just before half-term? I would like you to write down names of any characters you can remember. So pause the video for 5 minutes to do that now. Okay, so these are the characters: Leonato, Hero, Beatrice, Don Pedro, Don John, Benedict, Claudio, Antonio, Borachio, Margaret, Ursula, Dogberry, Verges, and the Friar. So hopefully you had at least a couple of those written down. Please pause the video for 2 minutes to make sure you've got all the characters written down into your book. Okay, so before half term, you were asked to watch the Royal Shakespeare Company production of Much Ado About Nothing. Today, we're going to recap the key plot details in a Whoosh reading. If you were in a classroom, you'd be sat in a circle and people would get up to represent the different characters in the story. The word whoosh is used to make a change in time or scenery, or just to empty the stage from all the people that have ended up there. Instead, sit back and enjoy the reminders of the story, read to you by yours truly. It might help to write down the names of the key characters on the next slide, and to keep note of what happens to them and who they are connected to. So the version you watched set the story just after the First World War, but really Shakespeare's story took place in Renaissance Italy. It took place in Messina in Sicily. So let's start. Once there was a rich and famous governor of Messina called Leonato. He had a virtuous daughter called Hero and a feisty niece called Beatrice. They were waiting for their friends who were in the army to return from a war. The soldiers arrive. They are led by Don Pedro, a brave and noble gentleman, closely followed by his illegitimate brother Don John, a nasty man, and two very fit young bachelors called Benedict and Claudio. So everyone is welcomed by Leonato. Beatrice and Benedict, who already know and dislike each other, immediately start to wind each other up. Beatrice: I wonder why you were talking, Signor Benedict. Nobody marks you. Benedict: What, my dear Lady Disdain? Are you yet living? Meanwhile, Claudio has his eye on Hero. She was gorgeous. He had fallen deeply in love. Then Leonato jumped up and said it was time for a party, and everybody cried, Hurrah! As everybody left for the party, Claudio drew Benedict and Don Pedro aside. Claudio admits that he has fallen in love with Hero. Benedict thinks that he is a fool, but Don Pedro offers to help him with a cunning plan. I will assume thy part in some disguise, and tell fair Hero I am Claudio, and in her bosom I'll unclasp my heart. Then she shall be thine. Now, hidden from view was Borachio, a faithful servant to Don John. Boo, hiss! Borachio was a sneaky man who would do anything to get in with his master. When Don John heard the news that Claudio fancied Hero and was going to get help from his brother Don Pedro, he vowed to make trouble. If I can cross him in any way, I bless myself in every way. Whoosh! Inside Leonato's house, all the guests were getting ready for the party. Each person puts on a mask so that nobody knew who anybody else was. And then there's some dancing. As promised, Don Pedro, wearing his mask, approached Hero for a dance. He bowed and she curtsied, and off they danced. Then Benedict approached Beatrice for a dance. She recognizes him and winds him up, pretending she doesn't know who he is. Knowing full well she's speaking to Benedict, she asks, Do you know Benedict, the prince's jester? He's a very dull fool. Which makes Benedict furious, although he can't admit it, without ruining his disguise. Meanwhile, Don John, boo, approached Claudio. Pretending he did not know who Claudio was, he whispered into his ear that Don Pedro was in love with Hero, and he swore he would marry her tonight. Then he went off again. Claudio immediately thinks the worst of Don Pedro, his friend. Friendship is constant in all things, except in the affairs of love. He is convinced that he's been set up by Don Pedro, and gets himself into a right strop. Benedict tells him that this is all nonsense. Fortunately, Don Pedro has worked his magic, calls Hero and Claudio together with Leonato, Hero's father. The marriage is agreed and everyone is overjoyed. Hurrah! In the spirit of the moment, Don Pedro gets carried away as a matchmaker and vows that within the week he will make Beatrice and Benedict fall in love with each other. Everyone agrees to help. Meanwhile, Don John was fed up with his plan not working, but Borachio has another idea. He tells Don John that he has been wooing Hero's servant, Margaret, and that she will do anything for him. For 1,000 ducats, he will persuade Margaret to dress up as Hero and then woo her that night. Claudio and Don Pedro will be told. They will see the lovemaking and believe that it was the real Hero being unfaithful behind Claudio's back. Whoosh! Next day, Benedict was in the orchard, muttering and moaning to himself about love. Suddenly, he heard someone coming, and quickly he hid himself behind a convenient bush. In came Don Pedro, Leonato and Claudio. They saw Benedict hiding and decided to put Don Pedro's plan into action. Speaking loudly, so that Benedict could hear, Don Pedro said to Leonato, What was it you told me of today? That your niece Beatrice was in love with Signor Benedict? Leonato replied in a voice loud enough for Benedict to hear clearly, She loves him with an enraged affection. Then the three of them walked away, laughing under their breath to find Beatrice. Benedict popped out from behind the bush, and he scratched his head. Then he whooped out loud at the thought of marrying Beatrice. I will be horribly in love with her. Whoosh! After dinner, it was Hero's turn to trick Beatrice into falling in love with Benedict. She and her servants, Margaret and Ursula, make sure that Beatrice, who was sitting nearby, can overhear their conversation. Margaret talks about Benedict's excellent qualities, and Ursula asks Hero, Are you sure that Benedict loves Beatrice so entirely? Hero loudly agrees and adds that Beatrice would not be interested as she is too hard-hearted. Hero and her servants go off giggling. Beatrice stands up. She cannot believe her ears. Ashamed that her friends thought so little of her, she vows, Benedict, love on. I will tame my wild heart to thy loving hand. Whoosh! That night, Don John and Borachio put their wicked plan into action. They got Margaret to stand on Hero's balcony with Borachio kneeling below her. Don John persuaded Don Pedro and Claudio to watch. In horror, they watch Borachio calling, Hero, sweet Hero, and in the half-light, they believe they see Hero blowing kisses back to Borachio. Claudio, we already know how jealous he can be, swears that not only will he no longer marry her, but that he would reveal that she was a tart, in public, in church, on their wedding day. Borachio, now 1,000 ducats richer, gets drunk and struts around Messina, boasting of his villainy. 2 passing policemen, Dogberry and Vergers, overhear his story and arrest him. Whoosh! Meanwhile, Dogberry and Vergers go to speak to Leonato about the villain that they have apprehended. Leonato is in a terrible rush. He has his daughter's wedding to get to, and he refuses to hear their story. He tells them to interview the criminal and come back to him with full details. So at the chapel, all are gathered for the wedding. The friar is ready to do the service, and Claudio and Hero stand before him. Just as the friar gets to the part where he asks if there's any reason why the two should not be married, Claudio turns to Leonato and cries, Give not this rotten orange to your friend. And he flings Hero back to her father, accusing her of being soiled. Leonato is as shocked as his daughter at the accusation. He turns to Don Pedro, his friend. Don Pedro replies, Myself, my brother, and this grieved count did see her, hear her, at that hour last night, talk with a ruffian at her chamber window. Hero shakes her head in shock. She turns to her father, he pushes her away, then she faints. Claudio storms out of the chapel, closely followed by the Dons. Suddenly, the friar steps forward. He believes that Hero is innocent. He suggests that they tell everyone that Hero has died of shame, convinced that the news will make Claudio full of remorse. Everyone goes, leaving Beatrice and Benedict alone. At last, Benedict declares his love for Beatrice. I do love nothing in the world so well as you. And Beatrice replies, I love you with so much of my heart that there is none left to protest. Benedict, caught up in the romantic moment, sighs, Come, bid me to do anything for you. Beatrice looks him straight in the eye and commands, Kill Claudio. Despite his shock, Benedict nods his agreement. He will challenge Claudio to a duel. Whoosh. Later that day, Leonato meets up with Don Pedro and Claudio and tells them that their slander has killed his innocent daughter. I say thou hast belied mine innocent child. Thy slander hath gone through and through her heart. She lies buried with her ancestors. Then in comes Benedict, who draws his sword. Quietly he challenges Claudio. You are a villain, I jest not. You have killed a sweet lady, and her death shall fall heavy on you. Then to top it all, in comes Dogberry and Verges with their prisoner Borachio. They fling him to his knees before Leonato, and he whimpers his confession. Claudio realizes what an awful mistake they have made. He goes down on his knees before Leonato and begs, Choose your revenge yourself. Leonato tells him that he must first write a speech to clear Hero's name, and speak it at her tomb that night. Then tomorrow morning he must marry Hero's cousin to restore the family honor. Whoosh. That night the family tomb is dressed for Hero's funeral. Claudio and Don Pedro and their attendants slowly process the mourning around the tomb. Claudio sings, So the life that died with shame lives in death with glorious fame. Hang thou there upon the tomb, praising her when I am dumb. Whoosh. The following morning there is another wedding. This time Claudio will marry a woman he has never seen before. Benedict asks Leonato to marry Beatrice at the same time. A double wedding, hurrah! Then 2 brides wearing veils step forwards. Claudio asks which one is his. She throws back her veil and reveals herself to be Hero. Claudio is overjoyed. Leonato declares, She died, my lord, but while her slander lived. Now Beatrix steps forward and takes Beatrice by the hand. Both couples marry. News then reaches the congregation that Don John has been captured. Benedict asks that everyone doesn't think about him until tomorrow. Tonight is a time for celebration and dancing. So, how much can you remember? I would like you to put away any notes you've made to test what you've retained. Write down a list of as many characters as you can remember, connections between the characters, and details of what happens to each of the characters. So pause the video for 15 minutes to do that now. So these are the character connections. You've got Antonio and Leonato, who are brothers. Leonato is the father of Hero and uncle of Beatrice. Hero and Beatrice are cousins. Don Pedro, Don John, Benedict and Claudio are all soldiers. Don Pedro and Don John are half-brothers. Hero and Claudio get engaged. And then flirtatious fighting between Beatrice and Benedict. Borachio is a servant of Don John, and Ursula and Margaret are servants of Hero. Borachio and Margaret have a casual relationship. Dogberry and Verges work together as part of the watch. So spend 5 minutes making sure you have this down in your books. And finally, Dogberry and Verges work for Leonato. Okay, so well done for your work today. Next time we'll be looking at the first scene, focusing on the first interaction between Beatrice and Benedict. So thank you very much for your work today. Have a lovely rest of your day.